Good day, everyone. This is Lisa Porter, your host of Pet News Radio, sponsored by Pet Hotels of America, the leading travel website for pet owners. Today, we're lucky to have with us Nona Bauer, author of Hero Dogs of 9/11. Nona, thank you so much for being with us.
Lisa, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, could you tell us what your book is about?
Dog Heroes of September 11th is a tribute to all the search and rescue dogs that worked during the 9/11 disaster. It recognizes what the dogs did, how important their contribution was to the rescue effort, their handlers, how they're trained, and basically wants to honor those dogs for their service to the country during that time and since that time.
How did you locate all these dog teams that are profiled in Dog Heroes? Because it seems like it would have taken a whole lot of research.
It did. It was a ton of research. Initially, when my editor proposed the idea initially as a result of a picture that I had sent him, I was reluctant to do that because I thought, A, I didn't want to revisit that time, and B, how do you find all these dogs? Well, a little bit of internet research not only convinced me this was a story that had to be told because I'm a dog person, and I had no idea how important these dogs' work, how important their work was, and I thought if I don't, as a dog person, the average American has no clue. So I said, okay, I will embark on this project with you, but how do we start? So I went into, FEMA websites. I personally didn't know a single search dog handler, made a few calls, sent a few emails, and initially they did not want to talk to me. This was a year after 9/11, and they didn't know who I was, or was I going to exploit what they did. They'd had some bad experiences, and so big deal, it was a dog writer. Who am I? Well, finally I talked to a handler in California. Her name is Lynn Engelbert, and we got into a conversation about my dog history, the fact that I trained field trial dogs, I had a field champion, and then I was not only a dog writer but a dog trainer as well, and she was convinced that, okay, you're all right. So she contacted all of her FEMA team members and others and said, this lady is okay, you can talk to her, and it began from there. The more I talked to people, the more they said, you need to contact so-and-so, you need to contact so-and-so. I'd still be writing a book today. I'd still be wanting to contact one more person because there's always one more that I haven't been able to reach. But I ended up, after a year and a half, I had to call it quits. We ended up profiling 77 dogs and their handlers. All these dogs worked at the 9/11 at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, as well as the Fresh Kills dump site where they hauled all the debris from the 9/11 disaster. So it was a huge project. It involved a year and a half of questions and phone calls and emails and photos soliciting, and but so rewarding, so very rewarding.
So let's jump back to 9/11. How did the dogs react when they arrived at the disaster sites?
It was no big deal for the dogs. They're so highly trained and so intensely trained that they look at all these various disaster sites like it's just one big playground. Like, oh, great, one more place to search. Goody, let me at it. In spite of the magnitude of that, that's how they viewed the scenario. Now, how their handlers reacted did affect the dogs because the handlers' feelings travel down the leash and to the dog. So, if the handler was upset or distressed, then the dog felt that and became anxious. It was their job to look at the job that had to be done, finding the victims, and not let their own feelings get in the way so it wouldn't affect their dog. So basically, it didn't bother the dogs at all. The only thing that did bother them was the fact they didn't find any living people, because that's what they're trained for. So what they had to do was conduct mock searches and hide their teammates and other people so that their dog could find a victim, and then they'd get their reward and be happy to go to work again.
I would have been so concerned if one of those dogs would become sick, and I'm sure that was a huge concern for the handlers.
It was a big concern, and but interestingly, I think the dogs were better cared for than the handlers. The handlers always took care of their dogs before they took care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The dogs were only allowed to work on the pile or in the various disaster sites for anywhere from 15 minutes to half an hour. And then the dogs went to a veterinary medical assistant tent called VMAT, where they had their eyes flushed, their nose passages flushed, their paws cleaned, they were bathed, and examined for any cuts and scrapes. So the dogs were maintained between each search task. So they were actually better cared for than the handlers. The handlers took care of themselves next. There was a study done at the University of Pennsylvania following 9/11 that studied the health of the dogs for the next 5 years to determine if they had become ill as a result of their work there because of the health problems that ensued with people. But really, they found no actual link between, say, cancers and the dogs. The dog's lifetime is being limited to, say, 10, 13 years anyway. If they get cancer at 12 and they worked there 8 years ago, who is to say that caused their cancer? They found no direct link between 9/11 and any future health problems with the dogs.
So their role of the therapy dogs that were there were to find people that are alive, and fortunately they didn't become sick. And so a lot of your book centers around the different stories for each one of the dogs, correct?
That is correct. Each one's experience and how their dogs reacted, basically their dog's performance, each one was individual and each had individual stories to tell, all, of course, focusing on their behavior and performance during 9/11, during their disaster search. Interestingly, the dogs acted not only as search dogs, but also as therapy dogs, because during their downtime, the firefighters and the rescue workers would hug the dogs, and they'd be able to cry on the dogs. So the dogs actually played a dual role. There were also trained therapy dogs that came to the disaster sites to comfort the victims' families and friends who were there, hoping for good news about their families. That, of course, didn't happen. Those were in predetermined places where the families were gathering and the dogs could come and just be there for the people, because there was simply nothing as comforting as a dog to hug when you're really sad.
That's right. So they had a huge role in this.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. In fact, if it wasn't for the dogs, Lisa, literally hundreds and hundreds of families would not have had pieces, I hate to say that, but would not have had their loved ones to bury, because the dogs found those remains buried under all that debris. Even the live find dogs were trained to find living victims, and they're trained to pass over any cadavers or any dead bodies. But the handlers are so tuned into their dogs, they could tell by their body language, a slight pause, a little turn of the head, maybe a droop of the tail, that there was something there. So they would instruct the rescue workers, check here, check there, and sure enough, there would be someone buried in that debris, or multiple people buried in that debris. So the dog's behavior, even live find dogs, was extremely important to finding all of those victims. The bomb dogs are in the book.
Okay.
The first edition was published